I'm just endlessly fascinated with light in the face, you know, and I think in a sort of interior space, it just opens up a sort of kaleidoscope of options. Daniel Day-Lewis plays Ray. He abandons his partner who's pregnant with their son. He goes off into the wilderness, and it's just about a discovery and this reconnection between two brothers and family. What I loved about Anemone was so many intense two-handers, you know, it feels almost kitchen sink, social realism, you know, just this intense dialogue, very long monologues, two people talking in a room. It just immediately spoke to me to say that these scenes need to be handled with a visual restraint, static compositions, allow that tension to breathe. The script is exploring the rich inner world of Ray, you know, and it's handled in a very sort of metaphysical, visual way. So we have dream sequences, quite big set pieces, this vast indifference to the landscape, this intensity between two guys having it out and these long 12-minute monologues. And there's a film called The Banishment, which I love, and it just visually enforces images of alienation, loneliness and isolation. Ronan wanted these painterly unreal, brooding skies, like there was this threat and something's about to happen. Ronan and I watched Stalker. We looked at Autumn Sonata, the way that you can kind of really compress two people in a frame, but what we realised is that you actually have to ask your actors to stand incredibly close to each other. But luckily for us, there were scenes where they were really in each other's faces, and it was about finding that intensity. But what I found was more difficult and important was, even though these two people are in a very small room together and they are family, they are completely at odds and almost feel disconnected from each other. How do you capture this distance? So I would often essentially frame the character in the sort of human perspective. If I'm talking to you right now, I'm just like, you know, I get a sense of space either side of you. And I just love that Nathan in the edit chose the wider frames, because we would sometimes punch in and get close-ups as well. For Daniel, it was super important for his character to exist in a world of all the props. Everything was carefully selected. He needed to feel this was real, and that also meant the same for the lighting. The gaffer Jono and I wrestled with lots of different options, and we nearly landed on putting, you know, softbox out of shot in the ceiling to kind of just light the space so that there was freedom for the actors, but it just would have felt like a studio environment and it just wasn't right. And then I think Chris Ollie just presented these paraffin lamps. I was like, what about these? We tested a few real ones and they were kind of really stinky and you need to keep refilling them. So in the end, the only way was to kind of retrofit them with RGB LED clusters. By the time the texture of the interior and the costume and the makeup all came together, you know, these lamps actually worked really, really well. It's sometimes quite uncomfortable to work with very, very hard light sources, particularly if there's a lot of movement and people moving around. But they did produce these wonderful highlights, and sometimes our really warm light would just fall off, and Chris Oddy created this dark background and all the costume was dark. So we had these light absorbing materials, so just their face and their eyes hung out in the darkness, and really it was all about the highlights that made the magic of those close-ups, and it was simple in the end. I live in East London and I've lost count the amount of times I've driven along the A40 and popped into Panalux and Panavision to do a little test that I probably didn't need to do, but just something that stops me sleeping on a nettle bed of nerves. And they're always just ready to accommodate and find a space and just be super helpful. They've supported me on things and helped me sort of test and figure out what's the right lens choice, what's the right lighting. You go to Panavision for the support and the unique optics. You know, some of the lenses are almost too mysterious to be understood, and Panavision was super helpful to me and generous early on in my career, and I love to have that relatable kind of relationship, really.